Yeah, basically my son in 2010 got leukemia, and then again 18 months later he got another cancer called Langerhans cell sarcoma. Made him the only person in the entire world to have these two cancers together, and so they had no protocol. They didn't know what they were doing with him. I didn't know what to do with him. Nobody knew what to do with him. They took parts of his body, sent them off all over the world to try and decide exactly what was going on and to what to do with him. And they decided that a bone marrow transplant was the way to go because both cancers were in the bone marrow. So to swap out the bone marrow, give him somebody else's bone marrow, this would be the only way to stop the cancers coming back. And unfortunately he ended up having 4 in 10 months because they just kept failing. Things just kept going wrong. And then he ended up picking up catastrophic infections whilst in isolation. He was in an isolation situation. He was 13 at this point, 10 his first cancer, 12 his second cancer, 13 when he had his first bone marrow transplant, and then 10 days after his 14th birthday, he was given 3 days to live. He was on what I describe as a conscious life support machine. He had 2 catastrophic infections in his hand and 1 in his mouth, and they said that the only thing keeping him alive at this point was blood transfusions and the plethora of antibiotics that we had up on his robot that we called him. And so I said to them at the time, I said, okay, so when I take him off of this conscious life support machine, when I take him away from all these drugs and these blood transfusions that you say are keeping him alive, how long are we talking? And they said 3 days a week at most, if you're lucky. When do you want to go? So I went back into the room where my son was now laying, and he's a very pragmatic young man, and he said, okay, how long have I got? And I said, they're saying 3 days a week at most. And he said, okay, let's go to the hospice. He was done. He'd had enough at this point. He'd had 4 years of chemo, 4 years of, 2 of those years were isolation, like complete isolation from the age of 12 to 14. And he was done. He was like, I want to die, I'm okay to go. I've had a fair innings, I'm all right. So we took him to hospice, and I planned his funeral with him, I planned everything with him. We sat down meticulous detail from the hearse to the music to the food to the costumes. My son had a very dark sense of humour and decided that everybody was to wear costumes at his funeral, so he was going to get the last laugh. And then whilst in the hospice, because of these infections, he had these big fat bandages on his hands, which they said the skin underneath was necrotic. It was pretty gross. And they said that these bandages, must stay on at all costs. So we protected this hand, he looked like Mickey Mouse, but we protected it. And so whilst in the hospice, they started to up the morphine, and they started to give him sleeping tablets, and they were just basically trying to numb him. Now, my son's dying wish, when we filled in the do not resuscitate form, my son's last dying wish was, I don't want to die on morphine. He said, Mum, they've taken everything else from me, they're not having my death. Please don't let them numb me, I want to experience a transition. And so as his mum and his advocate, that's it, thank you, his advocate at the time, that was my only job, was to not let them pump him full of morphine. And of course he starts getting very anxious, so they start pumping him full of morphine. And I was like, no, you have to stop. But when they did stop, the anxiety was quite horrendous. Now, they said that if you don't engraft after a bone marrow transplant after 50 days, it's never going to happen. Now, we went to the hospice at day 47. It got to day 69 and my son was still alive, but his organs were shutting down, his stomach was not working so much anymore, he was losing a lot of weight, he was very weak. And they were telling me that it was coming. I wasn't convinced, and I said on day 69, I said, I need you to do another test and tell me that there's nothing in his bone marrow. I said, because he's still here. He shouldn't still be here. You said 3 days. It's been a couple of weeks, so, what's going on? And we did. We took him into hospital on day 69. We went into his hip joint, and we took out some bone marrow. They tested it. There was nothing. Now, anybody that knows anything about bloods or anything like that, we have lots of different blood cells that deal with the immune system and these things, but the ones we're looking at is something called neutrophils, and those neutrophils are part of the white blood system that fight infection, and we're looking at that. If there's no neutrophils, then they can be killed by a cold. Something very, very silly could absolutely wipe somebody out. And his neutrophil count on day 69 was 0.0005. That's nothing. There is nothing there. So the nurse comes to me and she says, there's nothing in there. It is a case of you're just going to have to wait, something will get him. They used to use some really lovely words with me. And so I went back into the room with my son and I said, there's nothing in there. And he said, good. And I said, I agree. He said, if they'd have found even a trace of my bone marrow, I'd be back in hospital being prodded and poked. I've had enough. I want to go. So on day 70, when he was very anxious and he was having a lot of nightmares and they were wanting to come in with more morphine, I was like, no. And I'd made a tincture out of cannabis, marijuana, very illegally, but I read something somewhere and I thought, well, make a tincture. And I thought, you know what? Cannabis chills you out. So, you know, cannabis helps people sleep and it stops people's anxiety and it's good for pain and all of these things. And so, what if I just like bung a load of that in his mouth? I'm not going to kill him. You know, what harm can I do? So that's exactly what I did. And I just put a load of cannabis in his mouth and I watched him. It was like a body scanner went over him. I watched his shoulders relax. I watched him sink into his bed. And he looked up at me and he said, I'm good. I'm good. I said, fantastic. The nurse then came to the door with a drug called cyclizine. It's an anti-sickness, anti-emetic drug. It's very addictive. He's been addicted to that for about 9 months. And she came to the door with it because those nurses knew not to be late with this drug. And they came to the door and I thought, shit, what if what I've just given him has a reaction with what she's about to give him and I kill him? And she looked at him and she went, oh, you can take that, I don't want it. And I looked at her and I looked at him and I was like, and I said, take it away before he changes his mind. And that was it. No more anti-emetics, no more morphine, no more sleeping tablets, no more, that was it. It was done. I was just giving him the cannabis.
You said you made it as a tincture?
Yes. Yes.
With what?
I just got cannabis and I made it with vegetable glycerin and I cooked it in a slow cooker and I took the plant out and I was left with this beautiful vegetable glycerin, honey, like it was very mild. It wasn't anywhere near what I work with now. And so yeah, I just kept giving him the cannabis and he just kept being really relaxed. His sleep was really good and already for me it was a miracle because it was going to give him the death that he wanted and that was enough for me. That's all I had to do as his job as his mum. Lo and behold, 5 days after giving him nothing but this cannabis tincture, one of his bandages came off. And of course, you know, my son looks at me and goes, Mum, my bandage. And I was like, what? He goes, look. And I was like, I don't. He goes, my finger. And it was just a normal finger. And I went, hang on a second, because I know that you can't even replace skin cells without a functioning immune system. So the nurses come running in, they're like, oh my God, we need to do a blood test. And I said, 5 days ago, there was nothing in his bone marrow. It's not going to be in his blood. And they did a blood test and they came back and his neutrophils were 0.25. And they said, oh my God, yeah, tenfold. And they said, oh my God, he's not dying anymore. They shredded the do not resuscitate forms. They started running around like headless chickens and saying, you know, what's happened? This is a miracle. They gave it to God and I was happy for God to take it because the alternative was if they found out what I'd done, my son's going into care. They don't care what it's just done for him. He's going into care and he will die. I've seen it too many times over the last 10 years. And so I kept very quiet, but I just kept giving it to him. And then they kicked us out of the hospice because he wasn't dying anymore. And I knew that I had a very small window of opportunity to see whether or not this was the cannabis or whether this was just an anomaly. And so when his neutrophil count got to 1, I took the cannabis away and his blood count halved. And I gave the cannabis back and it doubled. And I took it away and it halved. And I gave it back and it doubled. And I watched that over a 6 blood test period. So I knew for a fact that it was the cannabis having this profound effect on his immune system. So he officially engrafted, which is where he made his own red blood cells on day 104. And so that's 54 days after they give up on you. And so they had my son in the hospital room and they said, oh my God, Darren, you know, you've been grafted on day 104. Have you got anything to say? And he said, hopefully you won't give up on people so early. And they said, well, he didn't give up on you. And he said, you sent me to hospice to die. Like that, you gave up on me. And he goes, but it's okay because I'm all right. And so he'll be 25 in December. He takes cannabis oil every single day and will do for the rest of his life, about 150 milligrams. It's a high, heavy dose. But he had 4 bone marrow transplants, and the first 2 were from a donor in Germany, and the second 2 were from himself. So those bone marrow cells that he has in his body are the 2 that have the cancer inside of them somewhere, the 2 that have been irradiated beyond belief. He's been cut, burnt, and poisoned beyond recognition. So those cells that are in his body would be absolute prime to grow cancer again, and he's cancer-free and has been for 10 years, just over 10 years. Every single day, his hand so what they did with his hand, they actually paralyzed it because it was so painful. they actually paralyzed his hand and said he'd never use his hand again. And I said, I don't care, he's dying. Like, I just want him to die pain-free, it's fine. 2 weeks after, I get him on much higher strength cannabis oil, he starts telling me his hands hurt. And I said, it can't. He's been paralyzed, surgically paralyzed, cauterized. And he said, Mum, I'm telling you, it's like electric shocks going down my fingers. So I Googled it, and sure enough, THC, the psychoactive component of cannabis, the one that's very illegal, the one that they scare you about, it's also the one that kills cancer cells, also is responsible for something called neurogenesis, where it regrows of neural pathways. In the last 10 years, I've seen people who've had strokes, who've had half-body paralysis, get their bodies back, just from using cannabis, because there is components within that plant that our bodies require in order for us to be at optimum health. And so for the last 10 years, what I did, I wrote a book. I have like 15 copies or something left upstairs, so if you want one, I'm more than happy to get you one, and I'll sign it for you. But this is a big story about basically what I learned. I would say this much is cannabis, this much is corruption, this much is medical neglect, this much is heartburn and poison, this much is exactly what the pharmaceutical industry is going to do to you if you don't sort yourself out. And so I try and educate people and try and get them to understand that prevention is far better than cure, is that you don't want to wait until your body is in a situation where you're trying to claw yourself back from ill health. It's hard. Once you've allowed yourself to get to a point where you're in disease, which is the opposite of balance, basically our body is designed to be in balance all the time. We are incredibly capable. God has given us an incredible machine here that is self-healing, providing we give it what it needs and we stop giving it what it doesn't need. And that's the thing that's most important, is process of elimination. You have to stop poisoning yourself. You have to. Because if you don't stop poisoning yourself, the pharmaceutical industry, and they're going, oh yeah, keep going, keep drinking those lattes, keep eating those candies, keep doing those things that you know are bad for you, because they're ready to mop it up. And so my mission, I guess, in this world, because I didn't have a purpose before my son got here. My son gave me a purpose, and my son helped me find God and what I'm meant to be doing here. And my purpose in this world now is I want to take down Big Pharma, right? I hate them. They tried to murder my son. But I can't, they're so big, I can't take them down. But what I can do is I can try and get people out of their pockets. I can try and help people move away from pharmaceuticals, and I can try and help them move towards nature, which God gave us all of these things to be able to heal ourselves. There is not one ailment that is a pharmaceutical medication deficiency. Just think about that. So my next part of my talk, and I haven't got very long to do it unfortunately, but my next part of my talk really is what I want to do is kind of give you some ideas of the basics that you can do for yourself, so that anything you put on top of it is going to have a much better chance. So I talk about the 4 foundational building blocks of life, and they are water, food, movement, and breath. And we can add an extra one in there of faith. Faith is incredibly important. Faith is very, very important. If you don't have faith in any of these other things, then forget them. They're not going to work. And so I try and help people. One of my taglines is, I'm not here to save you. I'm here to empower you to save yourself. Because you're all very capable of saving yourselves. I'm not here to come and hold your hand and come round to your house and put drops in your mouth and do all that. I'm here to say you are very capable of healing yourselves. You just need to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance you possibly can. And so the first thing I'll talk about is our breath. Man, it's free. Like, you don't even have to, thank you, you don't even have to go anywhere to go get any breath. But I guarantee most of us aren't breathing properly. Most of us aren't breathing as optimally as we possibly can, because a lot of our time we are in fight or flight. And if you know about the central nervous system, you have 2. You're in fight or flight, or you're in rest, digest, and repair. You cannot be in both simultaneously. So if you're not healing, you're hurting yourself by being in fight or flight. Now, fight or flight is really important if you're getting chased by a lion, or there's something going on, there is actually a genuine threat. Then fight or flight is there to tell you, this is a threat, I need to act. And you'll start releasing hormones and chemicals like adrenaline and epinephrine and things like this. Really important, but when you stay in that elongated space of fight or flight for too long, it's going to mess you up on a cellular level, and it causes all kinds of untold damage to your body. And so we can literally switch on our rest, digest, and repair, and our fight or flight. We can switch it on with our breath. Our breath is the remote control to our central nervous system. So if you find yourself, just everybody kind of think where you're at with your breathing. Just become very aware of your breathing. How are you breathing? Are you doing nice big belly breaths, or are you holding your breath at the top, or are you shallow breathing? Guarantee you're shallow breathing. Most of us are. Most of us go through our daily lives like just shallow breathing. That tells our central nervous system there's a danger. So by breathing in that manner, you're literally telling yourself that there's a danger. So your body is in fight or flight and on edge all the time. On edge all the time. And so we mustn't stay in that state. So whether you've just become, all I want you to do is become more conscious of your breath. And when you find yourself going, oh, I'm holding my breath, then take a big diaphragmatic belly breath. Your diaphragm is here, and if you breathe in through your belly first and then your lungs, you take big deep breaths. You only need to really take 6. And that will kind of reset where you're at, and it'll make you feel a lot better. If you suffer from anxiety or anything like that, breathe in. Breathe every single time you feel that kind of like, I need to get out. I used to suffer from anxiety a lot, and I would get that kind of, I'd be looking for the exits, and I'd be like, okay, I need to leave. And I used to write, when I first met my husband, and he loves his breath, I would write breathe on the back of my hand, because it would just remind, oh yeah, just breathe. Just breathe, like, that 6 times, everything just goes away. It just feels much nicer. But I would say just become more aware of your breath. That's the one thing. Awareness is key. Awareness to all of these things. Once you've got the awareness, then you can start putting these things into practice. And so your breath is the first thing that's really, really important to get on top of. Breathing diaphragmatically as well is what, and I'll talk about this next, is movement. But movement really is you're looking at your lymphatic system. So your lymphatic system, you have more lymphatic fluid than you do blood. And your lymphatic system is literally just doing this. I'm like moving my lymphatic system so close to the top of the skin. It's not deep. You don't need to do this. It's like it's literally just this. But your lymphatic system, if you're dehydrated or you don't move around enough, your lymphatic system is like your sewerage system. And I have an analogy that I try and use so that people can kind of understand. But imagine your body is like an office block. And bear with me. Your body's like an office block, and on every level of office block you have all these little desks, everybody's working away, and next to every desk is a little bin. There's a there's a trash can, there's a little waste paper bin, and everybody sits and they put their rubbish in the bin. Now that bin then goes and gets emptied into a bigger bin somewhere else on the floor, and then that bigger bin goes out to the big industrial bins outside, and then the bin men come and they empty the big bins, and then you start again. Now our big industrial bins are in our armpits, behind here where our tonsils are, in our clavicle here, around here, around our sacrum, and then in our groin and behind our knees. Now they're your big bins. Now they get swollen. You'll find your lymph nodes get swollen. It's because your body's trying to remove toxins. And that's what the lymphatic system is there to do, through sweating, through breath. When you breathe correctly, you're actually emitting 70% of toxins come out of your breath. So it's really, really important. You don't put a mask over it and breathe it back in. Don't do that. So let it all out, be able to breathe properly, and the diaphragmatic breath actually pumps the lymphatic system. You're pumping it around the body. And so you imagine if you don't have enough water, if you look at a stream, you see it's all gross and thick and sludgy. That's your lymphatic system if you're not drinking enough water or you're not moving around enough. So those toxins sit in your body for way longer. The longer the toxins are in your body, the more damage they're doing to your cells. And it's called oxidative stress. So we really need to avoid doing that, because that's what damages your cells, that's what causes aging, that's what causes cellular breakdown, all these kinds of things. So going back to the office blocks, if you were to get breast cancer or something like that, they'll then check all your lymphatic system and they go, oh, it's in your lymph nodes too. So then they rip out they take away your big industrial bins. They don't replace your big industrial bins. So where does the rubbish go now? It stays in your body. Now it really can't get out. So instead of removing the bins, we just need to bring the bin men in more regularly, okay? And the bin men coming in more regularly is movement, diaphragmatic breath, rebounding, saunas, inversions, going upside down, drinking lots and lots of water, and I'll talk about water in a minute. Movement and breath, and just keep moving and just keep getting the lymphatic system moving on you, because our bodies are absolutely amazing, again, at removing everything. We can get anything out of our bodies, including poisons. We can take on quite high levels of poison, providing we can get it out quicker than we can get it in. So if we put things in quicker than we get them out, that's when we get toxically overloaded, that's when we get dis-ease, that's when we get out of balance, and that's eventually when we have cancer, because cancer is just the end game from every disease that we have. Let it go on for long enough, it will end up as cancer. Yes, my friend.
So the elimination system from your lip then does not go through your normal body elimination.
Oh yes, it does. Yes, so bowels. So you need to make sure that you're going to the toilet at least every day. You're weeing enough and things like this. So that's where the water comes in really, really handy. You're flushing everything out. So your elimination pathways, you have to make sure they're open as well. If you're really bad with constipation and stuff, all those toxins that your body, it's an elimination path. If you're not getting it out, it's going back into your body. It's going back into your system, and it's poisoning you very, very slowly. And so we have to make sure that all these elimination pathways are open. So sweating, if you can't sweat, then there's something going on there that I could sweat for a long time, and I was like, I just don't sweat, and it's like, yeah, because you're clogged up. Like I didn't even understand back then. So saunas are incredible. Like if you can build up a sweat and you can drink a lot of water, then you're flushing, you're removing all these toxins. And of course, again, don't put the toxins in. there's the really simple thing is we all have. And I don't want people to be so scared of everything when we go out there into the world, because we are poisoned from the stuff they spray in the sky, to the stuff they put in our water, to the food that they put in our supermarkets. Like, we have to make decisions, because there's one thing that I always stuck with me when my son was ill, and it was God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You can't stop them spraying out there, but you can change what water you drink, you can change your food, can change how much you move your body. You can change these things. So focus on the things that you can change and forget the things that you can't, because stress is a killer too. So don't stress over the things that you can't change. There's no point. So then the next thing would be food. I know it tastes good. Man, I know it tastes good. When I was sat there last night at 11 o'clock eating half a tub of ice cream, I know it tastes good. But we have to be really conscious about the foods that we put into our bodies, because a lot of that, and I have to say as an English person, our food is not great in England, right? It's not great, but man, your food sucks here. Like, your food in the supermarkets is horrendous. The food dyes, the additives, the preservatives, man alive. When I first got to this country and I went into a supermarket, I was just blown away. I was like, they're allowed to feed you this stuff? Like, this is banned in my country, like, and in the whole of Europe. It's absolutely crazy that they are allowed to get away with this. So they don't care about you. They're not going to do it for you. You have to do it for yourself. You have to do it for yourself. And so food, really the most important things that we need to look at is try and get things as organic as you possibly can. Actually, you're at a preparedness event, try and grow your own as much as you possibly can. And if you can't, make sure that what you are sourcing is as organic as possible, or get it from local farmers. Like, make friends with your farmers. So know where your food is coming from, because you need to be avoiding things like glyphosate. You need to be aware of herbicides, pesticides. You need to be aware of growth hormones in animals, antibiotics in animals. All these kinds of things are going to they're just toxins. Again, they're more things that our body's going to have to process out, and it's going to make our body's job much, much harder. If we can put as least amount of stress on our bodies as possible, then we're doing the best that we can for ourselves. So make sure that you're looking, the first thing really to get gone, I can't, talk about ice cream, refined sugar. Sugar feeds cancer quicker than anything else. Cancer cannot proliferate without sugar, without glucose, just normal glucose. And I found this out, and it blew my mind, because when my son was first diagnosed with leukemia, I literally asked the doctor, shall I change his diet? What do I do? Should I feed him something different? And they went, nah, diet's got nothing to do with cancer. Doesn't matter, feed him whatever he wants. In fact, go get him McDonald's, because you're going to need to fatten him up, because chemo is going to make him lose weight. Okay then, so I didn't know any better. So I just did that, and off I went, and I fed my kid McDonald's and Burger King and all these other horrendous things, because they told me that I could and it was okay. And I believed them. So 18 months later, when he had his secondary cancer that turned up in his tonsils, he'd had his tonsils removed, but then he had some lesions in the back of his throat, and so they said, right, I want him to have a PET scan. I said, okay, so I took him to this PET scan. Now, 6 months previously to his cancer turning up, my son had lost a lot of weight through treatment, and he wasn't putting any weight on, and they were really worried about him. And he couldn't stomach a lot of the supplements because they were dairy-based, and he was just making him throw up. So the dietitian on the Children's Oncology ward gave me this tub of this white powder, and she said, just put it in everything. Put it in his drink, put it in his food, put it in everything. It doesn't taste of anything, put it in. Okay, so I did. 5 kilo tub. Fast forward, he's now at this PET scan, and the radiologist cardiologist comes in and she opens up this big steel box or lead box, and I was like, what is that? And it was a big fat syringe of what looked like molasses. And I went, what is that? And she said, it's irradiated glucose. I went, well, like sugar? She goes, yeah, it's just glucose. She said, cancer feeds on glucose. Glucose is cancer's favourite form of energy. Without glucose, cancer cannot proliferate. She said, so what we do is we'll inject this into him, and any cancer that's in his body will be eating this up, and we put him in a scanner and we can see where it's at. Oh, wow, okay. She handed me a Geiger counter and said, if this starts going up, move away from him. Okay. Tried to think what he's doing inside of his veins. And I thought no more of it until I got home. And I looked at the now empty tub on the top of my fridge, and I thought, God said, have a look at the ingredients. I turned the box around, 100% glucose. And even now I get like, and I just thought to myself, glucose feeds cancer quicker than anything else. My son's got cancer again. A dietitian gave him, why would a dietitian on a children's oncology ward give my son 100% glucose when glucose feeds cancer quicker than anything else when they're trying to treat him? Didn't make any sense. And it took me weeks and weeks and weeks of just like trying to find the reason, and the only conclusion I could come to is it's nefarious. Is that it's an industry, is that they don't know any better, they're given the information from their peers and they just regurgitate it as if it's fact, and they're doing some evil, dirty work that they don't mean to do. I have so much time for nurses and doctors. I have so much time for them. They have beautiful hearts that have been hijacked by a very evil system, and they're doing the dirty work of this evil system for them, and they think that they're helping, and they don't know. And so from there on in, that's when I started to wake up to like diet and nutrition and her, and so I started to change my son's diet, and my God, he hated me. You're taking my sugary stuff away from me, you're taking my McDonald's away. Yes, I am, because I love you. No, you hate me. No, I don't. But as a 12, 13-year-old boy, he was not happy that I was changing his diet. And then all the mums in the oncology ward started like, you're mad, you're crazy, you don't know better than a doctor. And I was like, look at all this information I'm trying to tell them about food, and they're telling me that, you know, I'm absolutely nuts, and I lost all of my oncology friends. They all turned their back on me and said that I was crazy. Okay, like, my son's still alive. No, and a lot of their children are dead. And it was so hard to watch, because at the beginning I'm like, I'm trying to shake people and saying, look, you need to stop putting them, you need to stop putting these McDonald's in the microwave. And they were like, I'd rather they ate something than nothing. I'm like, no, actually fasting is the best thing you can do. And they didn't want to hear it. And I think a lot of it comes down to responsibility. You don't want to be told that you gave your kid cancer, but I did. It was my fault. I chose to eat whatever I ate when I was pregnant with him. I chose to smoke and drink when I was early stages of pregnant with him. I chose to eat McDonald's while I was pregnant with him. I chose to have Pethidine and an epidural and all those other drugs while I was in labour. I chose to get him vaccinated. I chose to feed him junk. It's all my decisions that created my son's cancer, and I'm okay with it because I didn't do it on purpose, and I've made up for it now. So, but I think a lot of it is responsibility. A lot of parents don't want to hear that they're responsible for their children's illness. They rather think that it just happens. It's something that just happens. Because if it's something that just happens, then you can also outsource the treatment to somebody else. But once you realise that you're responsible for your vessel, and you're responsible for what you put inside your children, and you're responsible for your children's health, then you're empowered to be able to change things. If you think that somebody else it just happens, then you're going to look for somebody else to just fix it. The power is with you and your choices of every day. And so, stop the refined sugars. Just try as best you can to stop the refined sugars, and look in your food, because it's hidden in everything, in absolutely everything. Try and buy foods that don't have ingredients lists. Just try and buy the base ingredients and make your own food. Make as much from scratch as you possibly can. Cow's dairy, raw cow's dairy if you can. You want to avoid pasteurized. It's awful stuff. It's no good for you. Meat, make sure it's organic. It's grass fed. You know where it's come from. It's not full of hormones and antibiotics and all those kinds of things. Basically, try and get back to whole foods. Try and eat as your great-grandparents would have eaten. Try and do that, because there is a lot less of... Hello.
I just wanted to add, I actually counsel, I'm told I
That's fantastic.
and I have taught patients
Okay, so because obviously cannabis kills cancer cells, and I've now worked with hundreds of people over the last 10 years with cannabis, and I've seen stage 4 pancreatic cancer go into remission.
Wow.
I've seen glioblastomas. I've seen all kinds of, and I've also worked with autistic children, people with Tourette syndrome, autism, ADHD, fibromyalgia, MS, Parkinson's, you name it. It works for every single thing because of the way that it works on the endocannabinoid system. And it's been absolutely insane to see so many people get healed from cannabis and stuff like that. And but it's really important because people say, oh, so you're saying it's a cure? And I'm like, I don't think it's a cure for anything. I think it's a lifelong commitment of every single choice you make, either pushing your body into disease or pushing it into balance. And every single choice you make is on a sliding scale. Like, okay, you want to have an ice cream, pushing you towards disease, make sure you drink a ton of Kangen water afterwards. Or you want to have a biscuit, Kangen water. I'm going to talk about water in a second. We've got a thing up there, and I really love everyone to come and like try the water. But every decision, you just, again, awareness is key. Like if you want to be naughty and have something naughty, okay, do it. Don't restrict yourself like totally, but make sure you mitigate what you're doing. Make sure you do everything in your power to mitigate the damage that's going to be caused by that.
Are there some sugars that are better than others, or quote unquote?
So fruit sugars. Really, the only place you can get sugar from is fruit. Fruit. And if you can just get your sugar from fruit, whole fruits. Like dried fruits are really high in sugar, so try and avoid dried fruits. But just whole fruits, just normal fruit, apples, like whatever you want to have, but just normal fruit. I pretty much eat a carnivore diet. I eat meat, I eat beef, I eat fish, I eat butter, I eat salt, and fruit. That's pretty much all I eat. Honey's okay too. Yeah, honey has quite a high glycemic index, and agave actually has less. But if you have honey for your own bees, I'd say go with that and buy an agave in the shop. Like definitely be like self-sustained as much as possible. So yeah, I guess just be very conscious of your food. So the last thing that I'll talk about, about 3 minutes, unless you want to see beekeeping, you might want to hang around for a bit longer. But water. Man, water is so incredibly important. We are 75% water. Our brains are 83% water. Our lungs are 82% water. Like we are highly water beings. And our water source is one of the most poison things that is, we don't have access to water like God intended us to all those years ago. We don't have access to that anymore. And so when we talk about water, not all water is created equally. We have to become very aware of where our water is coming from. So tap water, I think a lot of people understand tap water is full of neurotoxins, it's full of fluoride, it's full of chloramine, it's full of all these other horrible nasty chemicals to stabilize it and treat it and make sure that it doesn't go moldy and those kinds of things. And all of those chemicals that are going into your body throwing you off. It's not good for you. Bottled water. I don't know if many of you know this, but bottled water, a lot of people believe that that's a better alternative. Unfortunately, that water has been in that bottle for around about 3 to 5 years before it even hit the shelf. That's 3 to 5 years of it sitting in a hot warehouse, a cold warehouse, covered in God knows what being dropped, God knows what's happened to it. And those plastic bottles contain chemicals that over time leach into that water. You can't see them, but they're in there and they're in that water. Plastic bottles have been heavily linked to breast cancer. And so if you ever have a plastic water bottle and it gets warm in your car, throw it out. Do not drink water that has been in a plastic bottle that's got warm. Now, oh my God, when I drive past the petrol stations in this country and I see all those crates of water outside the petrol station, I'm just like, oh God, because I'm just sitting there watching it in the sun, or it's in the window in the sun, and I'm like, oh, but of course, what can you do? You can only take care of yourself, and you can only do so much. And microplastics and things like that. So it's really, really important that we are aware of our water. Now, as nature intended, God intended us to be drinking spring water that had gone over rocks and is full of minerals and is bashed up, so all the water is like microclustered, so it can get into your cells, and it's negatively charged from the earth and the ions and all these kinds of things. We can't have access to that anymore. So,
does that mean you're a proponent of well water?
I am a proponent of any clean water, but clean water filtration is the first stage. We need to get back to how nature intended. We need to start drinking ionized water, which is if you were to go and live by a waterfall and you can get water straight out of that waterfall, then that's beautiful. That's ionized water. That's how God intends us to drink it. That's how it's meant to be. I could really go into the science, but I don't think I have a lot of time left. But our cells basically have this little tiny channel called an aquaporin, and it's tiny. And water that's been sat in holding tanks or in bottles, water that it just can't get in. So it goes through our system and it goes through our guts, and we get it out, but it's not getting into the cells. And that's where all the toxins are. And they're in our cells. So we have to make sure that water can get in our cells, flush out those cells, and actually get it out. And so I actually found out about ionized water when my son was in between bone marrow transplant 2 and 3. I met a guy, and he saved his own son's life with lots of